We're going to go to our session now on inequality, cause, and cure. Our first speaker is Tommas Graves, who came to London from country upbringing to be, what was this?
Nothing's okay.
You were trying to tell me something?
No, I'm just trying to take my papers away. I thought you said I was.
No, I'm just introducing you guys. That's okay. Okay, so country upbringing to be an article to a firm of chartered accountants in 1956. He joined the School of Economic Science soon after, qualified in 1963, moved to a large stock-broking firm in 1970, then to a firm of metal brokers in 1977, which was a subsidiary of Shell. He set up his own practice in Hatton Garden in 1982, again as a chartered accountant, and he moved this to his home in 1997. Active in School of Economic Science, on the economics faculty, as student, tutor, and research groups throughout. And from 2002 onwards, he's been involved with Land Value Tax Campaign, that was the acronym, the Henry George Foundation, Land is Free, Coalition for Economic Justice, and the IU. Thank you. Tommas.
Inequality, cause and cure. In Anglo-Saxon England, according to Kenneth Jupp, there is no trace of nobility except the nobility of the kingly family. Okay, a little preliminary. We have some dynamics in the economic situation which have to be borne in mind, and man seeks to gratify his needs and desires. It's very powerful, this. He needs food, clothing, and shelter. He can't do without these. The result of this desire, though, is what we call wealth. Air, sunshine, and land are not wealth. Rent is a maximum, so wages are reduced to a minimum, and taxes come out of rent. Okay, so that's the sort of underlying dynamics of the situation we're in. And to start inequality, I went back to Kenneth Jupp, a little book called Stealing Our Land. And in Anglo-Saxon England, according to Kenneth Jupp, there is no trace of nobility except the nobility of the kingly family. This was an age of freedom such as is beyond the comprehension of our own time. Little byway here. Inequality is a result of hard work or use of talents. We don't see that as a problem. But inequality, the result of taking the result of other people's work, this is our problem. Back to Kenneth Jupp. This was an age of freedom such as is beyond the comprehension of our own time. In other words, we can hardly imagine now what it could have been like. Then came the conqueror. And he quite naturally assumed that England was his. And there was a transition from the idea of usership to ownership. He distributed the land to his soldiers with duties attached. The feudal system decayed and the duties lapsed. But the idea that the land was owned took hold, despite the fact that when the king died, he did not take the land with him. But that's the land which he said was mine, and that's apparently one of the pictures of what he looked like. The power to own land was established in law, and rents were charged to those who needed to use the land. Thus it came about that some men worked to maintain others who labour not. That is unjust. And that's a quote from Mr. McLaren, who was the founder of this school. This confusion of ownership and usership is the beginning of inequality. And is it not amazing that we do not see it as wrong to charge a rent for that which is provided by free not by nature? What has happened to our sense of right and wrong? So there were palaces and hovels. A more familiar picture from the TV series Downton Abbey. Inequality due to the unjust distribution of wealth has been with us for a long time, but now it has jumped to new proportions. Just 1% of the world population owns 40% of the world wealth. And in the last 20 years, their share of incomes has increased by 60%. The Tax Justice Network has estimated that offshore wealth of some 10 trillion belongs to 92,000 of the planet's richest individuals, representing not the top 1%, but the top 1% of the 1%. Further, they have said that capital flight out of Africa, for example, has amounted to some 1,264 billion, just one measure of wealth flowing into tax havens. Now that's out of Africa, which is amazing, isn't it? At the same time, we read that wages as a share of GDP have been shrinking. Here is a chart from Australia, which you've seen before, showing that from 1911 to 2007, wages shrunk from 85% of GDP to 39%. And the question is, where does all the rest go? And Brian Kavanagh in Australia provides a very vivid picture of where it goes. It goes into tax and rent. This is in the context of a massive increase in productivity. And I'll give you some details of that later. But how is it that those who do the work share so little in the increase? It is proposed to explore the effect of inequality in 4 areas: interest, rent, taxation, and money. So, interest first. Interest is a charge for lending. Usury has been described as interest in excess of risk. Money for investment is normally extant money, in other words, it already exists, while new money is created by banks, mainly for mortgages, but also for business working capital. We have a system in which for 1,000 years we have piled rent onto those who say they own the land. As a result, they got very rich. So now we want to borrow some of it back for investment. They do not want to be involved in running the business or taking any more risk than they have to. So we have created a system that gives the lenders much power. Unfortunately, no moralizing about interest can possibly correct the power imbalance. So the borrowers have to pay what the lenders demand. But there is a sort of interest market and a limit set by what the borrowers can afford to pay. The banks, in making new money for mortgages, which is 70% of what they make, and working capital follow the market rate influenced by the power structure, and they also factor in the risk of non-repayment. So, to cure the interest problem, we have to cut the source of the lender's power, i.e. rent claiming. Next, what of rent? Here we need to distinguish rent of buildings and man-made things from rent for that which is provided by nature free. I run a website, by the way, called Land is Free. You can look at it whenever you go into your computer. Because it is actually free. But this rent, recipients cannot consume it all, so they tend to invest and want a return, see above. So they invest and seek security, which is readily supplied by the price of land, which price is boosted by the quantity of investment. As the price goes up, so does the rent. So now we have houses that no one under 35 can afford. So there is demand for renting, rents go up, so land prices go up. Round and round we go. So, to cure the rent problem, we have to divert it from those owners and substitute it for the damaging tax system we devised to avoid collecting rent for public purposes. So now taxation. The system we have is concentrated on taxing employers through the wage bill. This damages all businesses that are labour intensive. It also makes production costs uncompetitive as compared with other countries. Here are 3 charts to illustrate the damage done by our tax system. This is a chart very much used in the school, and it comes directly from Henry George's teaching. 8, that was the first one, yeah. 8 similar sites in size and labour applied, but with differing advantages such as infrastructure, transport, fertility and other factors external to the sites themselves, leading to greater or less productivity or added value. The level of wages will be set by the least productive site, and the excess is termed economic rent. Next one. Now tax has been applied at 50% of wages. And you can see immediately what happens. 2 sites have gone out of business and another is just hanging on. Much of the taxes have to be spent on keeping those from the 2 sites from starvation. And the alternative? Tax has been applied instead of the previous taxes at 50% of rent. Sites 7 and 8 stay in business and no tax is required in amelioration of poverty. And the further one is a chart to show the result today. What this shows is the under range of gross salaries at the bottom. The vertical bars show the amount of tax the employer has to bear over and above what the worker actually receives as a result of his work. This is direct taxes and indirect taxes, and there is a distinction shown here. The higher bars are employees and the yellow bars, or the lower ones there, are self-employed people. And you can see that we've got to a state where basically the cost of wages to an employer is doubled by taxation. And this is having a huge effect on the economy. So what are those to do who lose their jobs? The free land need is not available. So we have a welfare state. This means we have more taxation, so we then have more unemployment. Round and round we go. So to cure the taxation problem, we have to go back to the natural source of public revenue. So now money. Money is principally a means of exchange. Nowadays, we exchange everything that we make for everything we consume. Also, money is needed to exchange our production for housing. Here is a series of slides to show why money had to grow so large. The increase in production has been enormous. I am indebted to Hayden Bradshaw for the following examples. For example, wheat in 1790, one man could cut with a scythe 1/4 acre a day. By 1890, 2 men with 2 horses could cut, rake and bind 20 acres in a day. Textiles. In the 14th century, the spinning wheel increased production of thread times 10. In 1733, the flying shuttle doubled production. In 1764, the spinning jenny could spin 8 threads at once. By 1870, with the sewing machine, productivity has increased by more than 500%. Steel. Between 1920 and 2000, labour reduced from 3 hours per tonne to 0.003, i.e. 1,000 times more productive. So when we look at any charts, we have this amazing increase of productivity over the years. Okay, well, this is to illustrate the growth of added value from what was seen as simply work on land, and what has happened over the years. We've cooperated, we've specialised, we have inventions, we have mass production, and then lately we have communication, and each one has massively increased the added value. Now the next slide shows what happens to that. So basically the result, of course, is, as we know, divided between wages. Wages are more or less consumed, taxes, which are also consumed, but in a different way, and a proportion which is not consumed, which I've called I-rent. So you get new loans from the commercial banks, which creates a money supply, which enables us to exchange all this wealth and also the capital value of assets. And then you get repayments going back to the commercial banks. Housing goes up, see above, so more money is needed. Production also goes up with new techniques, etc., but much of the product is claimed by owners of land. This creates insufficiency of demand because the rich cannot consume all they get. New money is created by lending it, and that being so, the loans must be repaid. If not repaid, the lender suffers a bad debt, and the debt is repaid out of extant money. The government is in the same position as the household. If it wishes to spend more than its income, it has to borrow. Fortunately, there are those who are rich, see above, who are happy to lend their money to the government, viewing it as a safe investment. So to cure the money problem, we have to stop the accumulation of wealth in a relatively small number of people. That was another slide. Yeah. Yeah. Round and round we go. And another one, 26. So the problems of interest, rent, taxation and money all come down to the same thing, namely the accumulation of wealth in the hands of those who claim to own the free goods of nature. What we observe today is the result of the immoral theft of people's work to pay to those who claim to own the free goods of nature. We have done this for 1,000 years. Although we may tinker with the effects, it is unrealistic to think that any substantial change can take place without dealing with the cause of inequality. We can apply some simple tests to any proposals for reform. Another one. Any reform must pass these tests. Would the downward pressure on wages be reduced? Would our children be able to buy a house for the price of a house? Are sites available for use if only the annual location value charge is met? And I'd like to finish with 3 questions posed by John Stewart in this novel, The President. There they are. The 3 questions we can always use. What is location value? Who creates it? To whom does it belong? And the final answer to our problems is what I've called the location value ticket. And it says, I certify that the holder has paid the community for the advantages given to the site Old Harry's Field for the year 2013, amount paid 1234, no other taxes due. Signed, Clerk to the Commissioners. That's where we want to get to.
Are we having questions?
If there's time.
Yeah? Yes, or we go with the...
If there's time.
Yeah.
If the
Well,
time,
we
if the
have-
time is there, take go for questions.
5:10. Yes, we have a few questions, very brief questions, please. Yes?
Duncan?
I once attended a public lecture when I was at the University of Leeds, given by a chap called Ralph Garendorf, who was the director of the London School of Economics. At the beginning of his talk, which was about the subject of poverty and inequality, and he said that poverty began with the enclosure of the common lands 200 or 300 years ago. So when he'd finished, questions were invited, and I asked him if, bearing in mind his opening statement, what was the relevance of land in the modern economy? And he said it was completely irrelevant. No longer of any worthy of consideration.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it is.
And that, I think, is where, well, some points I've been trying to make, is that the basic problem is with the subject of economics, which is no longer directed towards the factors involved in the creation of wealth and the distribution of the proceeds between those factors which produce wealth. The subject has lost its way.
Yeah, I think that's really why my feeling is we have to plug the idea of location value.
Yes.
Because it's not the land itself, it's there. Just like air is, it's there. It's the value that's attributed to it because of the ability to claim rent. That's all, really. And it's the value, location value, which is the thing that I think we have to push, the idea.
Any other questions? Yes,
You
please.
said you said that land is free. In what sense did you mean that?
It is here.
Provided with a
Free like free beer or free like free speech?
Free like
It's
air.
not freely available, is it?
Freely. Well, we've created a situation which is not freely available, but in essence it is free, just like air. It's provided to us when we're born, and we can't take it with us when we die.
Yes.
Well, I like the fact that you use that as a provocative statement. You make that statement, land is free, and of course everybody has questions in their mind, so I think it's a good teaching tool.
Yeah, that's right.
So how come it doesn't seem to be?
Yeah, so there
We
you
can make it
go.
more than free
Then you
land.
tell your whole story from that
But
point.
how come it doesn't seem to be is the story that we're up against. Yeah.
Yes, because landowners like me don't admit that it's worth anything.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
I just wanted to make a point. I really love this idea. I think this is great. The location value concept means things to people, a lot more than land because of the disassociation from it. And on your previous slide, you talked about with the tests of reform, would our children be able to buy land, buy a house in the same way we have in the same area? I think that's actually a real key to getting the large baby boomer group on board, actually, because in Australia, again, we talk about the chattering classes, and then we also talk about things becoming a doctor's wives issue, and when things become a doctor's wives issue, things tend to happen. And I think that about their children is a key into their motivation. And I actually have been speaking to some doctors' wives, sort of just because I happen to know them, and they all understand straight away. As soon as you say to them, "Do you realise your children can't buy a house the same as yours?" and they all sit back and then they ask me more questions. So I actually think that's a great link into the community mindset.
Here, you please.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that because the situation in Belgium, I think it will be a bit harder to convince the baby boomers because the way it is now is that the children are made to afford their houses because their parents support them with the money, and the money they use to support their children is what they made on their houses. So they're all rich because of the houses, the land value that went up under their houses, and now they're using their savings to support their children, and that sort of, in their minds, makes the circle round, and they think it's a good system because now the children can continue the cycle and become richer. So I think it would be a bit harder to convince because they see it as working really well. So yeah.
As I see it, the whole situation is now accelerating. The house I live in has gone up 5 times in 15 years. But my children can't afford a house. So something is happening, it's getting tighter and tighter all the time. In a way, I think this will eventually force us to agree that location value ticket, I like to remove LVT into a different phrase, but it will force us to do it because otherwise everything will collapse. When everything is owned by one man, we should all be very poor, except that man.
Yes.
Can I just say that I came across a phrase a while ago where this chap said that a house should be a place to make a home, not a place to invest large amounts of borrowed money to make an unearned capital gain from
Yep.
its possession.
Thoroughly agreed.
Well, I'm afraid a big applause, he's done a great job.
Again.
We're going to need to take a few minutes to set up for Molly's slideshow. So can you just continue a discussion a little bit while we
Okay,
get
so
that set up?
okay.